Press Control to crouch.
The Crouch Peak Podcast.
All right, guys. So we are live with another episode of the Crouch Peak Podcast. As always, a part of the Rush B Media Network. This time around, brought on Mr. Muenster of Party Astronauts. He is currently the coach of said team. So thank you to Joe for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the topic of conversation as to why I wanted you here today was to discuss the team development document that you made some point last week. I believe it was last week. My memory
Yeah,
might
it
be
was.
off. So first and foremost, what inspired you to create this said document?
Well, we had been in the middle of player break, and there wasn't really anything going on, and I was feeling pretty bored. So I just wanted to, refresh my brain, just kind of get me thinking about Counter-Strike again. So I kind of did this development and team building document as like a thought exercise for Counter-Strike. And as I was just like adding things into it, I just thought it'd be something that a lot of people could use and could be really useful for like up and coming players and teams as like a resource. So I decided to sort of fine tune it, format it properly, and put it out there for everybody to read.
Okay, so when you say everybody, this kind of bridges into my next question. Were you considering any specific skill level when you made this, or was this literally for any demographic to tap into, as far as skill
Uh,
is concerned?
for the most part, it was for lower level players and teams, but it's definitely something that I can see being useful for some higher level teams like Top Premier. Maybe there's some stuff in there that even pro teams didn't really know because, of course, a lot of the scene is made up of very young people. So there's a lot that people just don't even know, even at higher skill levels. But for the most part, it was something that I was sort of developing for lower level teams, just like people first learning how to play Team CS, or people who kind of have an idea how to play Team CS but don't really know how to properly build a team, and they're just kind of winging it and learning as they go. I just kind of felt like this is a good resource for. It's just kind of a group of information that I've learned over my years as I've developed teams and worked with teams. So I just thought it'd be easier for me to put it out there for people instead of having them try and figure it out on their own.
Okay,
Save a lot of lower level people a lot of time.
yeah, and I think a big issue with North America is creating that pipeline of information. I feel like a lot of
Mhm.
people are kind of in the dark as to, especially like you said, on that developmental cycle, getting
Yeah,
your foot in the door, how to do those things properly. So,
yeah.
moving to the first position we talked about, or we as in you, in this document, the in-game leader. So, um,
Before we start, I just
yeah,
want to say, as you get higher in skill level, a lot of these roles that I listed in my document become not as relevant when developing a team, because the higher skill level you get, the more likely you're going to be required as a player to do and fill multiple roles. So when I focus around what I've wrote about these specific roles is more really focused for lower level people who are just starting out how to play these roles. So
okay,
I just wanted to get that out of the way
yeah.
before we start going into each individual
And
role.
honestly, that's really informative because even you know great the thinkers of this scene,
Hmm.
the writers and the higher ups of positions and staff and etc. We're constantly having that conversation of um, how to define a lurker, how to
Yeah,
define a support player. So
that's exactly. Yes,
it is
support and lurk are the big ones. Yeah.
exactly. So once you get to those upper echelons of Counter Strike, they do blend. So yeah, that is
Hmm.
a
For sure.
very good tidbit of information. So when we do start with in-game leaders, as far as that position is concerned, me personally, I'm of the opinion that NACS does lack leadership. So do
Hmm.
you? This is a two-part question. Do you think this is a fair assessment? And as far as when it comes to being a leader in NACS, do you think that is dependent on the in-game leader to be a leader outside of the server?
Yeah. So I definitely agree that NA is lacking in-game leaders or people aspiring to be in-game leaders. But I think that's just kind of side effect of like interest in the game in North America kind of fizzing out. Very recently, we've seen like a lot of interest starting to come back, especially in the form of like organizations starting to reinvest in stuff. And I think as this interest starts building up again, more people are going to be aspiring to these specific roles. So hopefully, we'll see a resurgence of people trying to become in-game leaders and help develop teams and players themselves. But for now, yeah, your question regarding like inside and outside of the game, I think at lower levels, the in-game leader definitely needs to be the guy that's kind of directing everybody inside and outside of the game. They're definitely the person that everybody on the team is looking towards. There isn't really any other player on the team that like all 5 or 4 other people on the team are like constantly like trying to be aware of what they're saying. So it really helps when your in-game leader recognizes that they're the person that everybody's listening to and kind of helps them stay motivated, helps them stay on track and do the necessary work outside of practice that's required to really build a team. Um, which it also comes in the form of the coach as well if your team has a coach. But at lower levels, coaching isn't really as prevalent, so it doesn't really apply.
Okay. Okay. So you make a few gestures about the similarities regarding what it means to be like an opper as far as the importance.
Hmm.
And you kind of bridge that gap between the op role and the IGL. And of course, there's a few other factors, that make those two somewhat similar. Do you think it's possible in the current meta of CS to have that position be played by one player at a high level, kind of how we were used to with like Fallen as a prime example? Do you think that's doable anymore? Or do you think the meta's kind of shifted away
You
from
mean
that?
like the op IGL combo?
Correct. Somebody who can go in there and dominate as far as
Mm,
two really relevant positions in a lineup. Do you think that's doable
I
anymore?
think it's definitely doable, but it's a very rare combination. Very rarely you'll be able to find a person who's capable of balancing all the in-game thinking with, you know, setting themselves up for op plays, since the op role is such a vital part of a team's success. They're generally the star player, so having that star player also be somebody who's capable of directing everybody else on the team and kind of giving the instruction and making sure the rounds are playing out the way that's planned and putting in that extra prep time outside and stuff, it's generally not something you'll come across, especially at lower levels. I think that's a very difficult thing to balance, which is why I think even at the higher levels it's something that you don't really see that often. I think the 2 most notable ones that come to my mind are Fallen and Nitro, back when Nitro was playing in Liquid and they were doing really well.
Okay. So preferentially, like you as a coach, that's not something you would want to aim for.
Like I said, it just depends on the player. If you have a player who's capable of that balance, then I don't see why you wouldn't try to make it work. But generally, there aren't many players that are capable of it, so I would personally, yeah, try to stay away from it.
Yeah. Sounds more like a very rare talent kind of comes along
Yeah,
to handle that.
exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, moving into entry fragging, definitely a um, high risk, high reward kind of position. You talk about in the document, you say it's more than a role, it's a mindset. So, again, I got
Yes.
another two-parter here. Can you kind of go deeper into detail what you mean by that? And
Hmm.
in your experience, what are the tells in server that a player is kind of locked into it versus it just being a role to them? What do you see in that?
So the reason I say it's more of a mindset over a role is because the entry rifler like mindset needs to be a personality trait, in my opinion, where it's like they're just a really selfless player. They're really good at just shaking off misplays, really good at shaking off deaths. They just need to be hyper focused on the game. They need to be constantly uh, getting set up into aggressive positions, or they just always need to be ready to just go in and die and sacrifice themselves for the betterment of the team. It's generally not a role if you have it set like a set entry role at a lower level. It's generally not a role that people get high stats playing, which is why you generally don't see hard entries at lower levels, because people are, even if they don't say they are generally worried about their stats. Um, you're not going to get good stats playing the entry role. It's just not something that's going to happen if you're a hard entry. And you need to be able to accept that fact and still be able to do your job in the matches and do what needs to be done. And that generally means throwing your life away to set your teammates up and get information and get yourself into positions where you can direct a solid finish.
Okay, so that definitely bridges into the question I was going to ask you next. I was going to ask you if it is hard to find players with that
Mm,
mindset and if stats play a role. So you kind of already answered that for me.
yeah.
I guess, piggybacking off that answer that you've already provided, do you think there is a way? Because I do like stats, regardless of CS. Like I am a stats
Yeah.
driven guy, sports wise. I like analytics. Do you think that we will be able to like find that balance, or do you, like when it comes to this entry fragger role, it is really easy, and I have players in the back of my mind that have often been victims of that. Oh, look at their
Hmm.
stats, they got to go, right? And then
Yeah.
they replace them and the whole thing crumbles. So
Right.
is this more of like we need to rework the statistic systems, or do we as like a community need to kind of readjust our vision of what that means? Like, is there a perception that's incorrect here, or is this just kind
I
of how it
think
is?
Yeah, I honestly I think stat wise that's just kind of how it is. There isn't really a good stat aside from I would say KAST that really gives you a good indicator of like how much impact a player is actually having with low stats. Because like generally you'll be able to look at a game's match page and you'll see like this guy has low kills, so he probably had a bad game. But if you also try like watch the game and you see him playing that entry role, and then you look back at the stat page and you see even though he had low kills, he had a high KST. That means he's performing the role that's needed for the team to succeed. Generally, a high KST means they're putting themselves in positions where they can get traded. They're either trading their teammates effectively. They're like it just means they're doing their job. Like so, I think the entry fragger position needs to be something that people look away from stats more, and it has to be something that they just look for in game by actually watching them play. It's definitely something that when I'm looking at an entry fragger, I'm watching their POV in game. I'm watching how they're playing around their teammates, how they're getting set up, how their teammates are spaced behind them, the kind of plays that they're doing, where they're looking for information, that kind of stuff. It's something that you can't see from stat pages. It's just not possible.
Absolutely. And for those that are unfamiliar, when we say KAST, it's an acronym: kill, assist, survived, or traded. That's a percentage
Hmm.
of how many rounds you were involved and you did one of those things. So
Yeah.
just for those who are unaware, that's what he's referring to. So yeah, that's an interesting one. The entry frag's definitely an interesting one.
Yeah.
You see a lot of especially like fan favorites players. Um,
Hmm.
they're often like rubbed in between that divide where it's the dedicated fans are aware of the work they put in, but
Yeah.
people who are just kind of like stat vultures just kind of poking their head in and looking at it, it just doesn't
Hmm.
do them justice. So yeah, it's a tough one,
Exactly.
definitely. Um, so moving on to supports, as if we haven't had those interesting discussions about these vague roles. It's just so interesting how you described in the beginning of the interview. When you do get upper into the higher tiers of CS, they do kind of fade away. But honestly, it doesn't really
Hmm.
seem like it happens that far into the journey. It seems like it kind of happens almost right away. You're
Yeah.
kind of tested as a CS player pretty early. Can you be multifaceted almost? I think that's really important for
Hmm.
players
Yeah.
anymore. So when I look at support players, you did discuss how that's not a dedicated role, even in this developmental form. So even at
Hmm.
the lowest echelons of CS, you mentioned it's not a dedicated role. But those that can do it or want to do it should be mechanically on par, right? They need
Yep.
to be hyper aware of situations and they need to be communicative. So when I
Hmm.
read that, to me, that sounded like either an in-game leader without the calling or something like an in-game leader light version.
Hmm.
Is that
Like a
how?
secondary caller. Yeah.
Yeah, so like a mid-round kind of guy. Is that kind of what you think a good support player should operate like?
So the reason why I said that it's not I didn't say that it's not a dedicated role. It's not necessarily needed to be a dedicated role.
Okay.
There are definitely teams where the structure likes to have that as a dedicated role, because when you have the same guy throwing all the nades, like, you can build consistency and timings are set and everything. Like, that helps for lower level players, especially when running strats. But the reason why I don't think it should necessarily be a dedicated role, the support player, is because support, rifle, entry, those are three things that once you get to like mid-tier to high-tier premier level, like, that's something that most riflers need to be able to do, all three things. So when I say a support rifler, I generally mean a player whose playstyle is generally slightly more passive, who isn't as comfortable as certain other players, like playing aggressively, uh, going for those aggressive duels and trying, like, willing to sacrifice their life. But yeah, I agree that they definitely need to be mechanically on par with the rest of the team, because if you have everybody kind of filling all the roles when necessary, then obviously you would want that player to be as gifted as everybody else on the team as well, so they have the same level of success doing whatever it is your team is trying to accomplish in the round.
Okay. Okay. So at this current echelon of CS, like it's not an excuse anymore to be good at other facets. Like if you're just not good
Yeah, I mean,
at fragging, it's kind of
it's
moot.
like a jack of all trades sort of thing. Like, once you hit a certain point in your CS career, like, you kind of need to be able to do everything, excluding IGLing and opping. I think, like, having those as set things is fine, and generally what even pro teams do. But I think in terms of rifling, like, you kind of need to be a jack of all trades. You need to be able to fill any role that's necessary for whatever's going on, because reactionary CS is a big thing that people try to do. You need to be able to adjust on the fly. You need to be able to call audibles. You need to be able to fall back. You need to be able to cancel strats. Like, if you can't do all three of those roles, then you won't be successful when things don't go the way you plan.
Okay. So moving on to the lurk role, you mentioned how difficult it is to be effective as a lurk, just because of the instincts you have to build, knowing the rotations, the timings, and of course, 7 maps in the pool.
Yep.
They do rotate, so you do have to be active in this regard. So we're talking about a developmental document here. We're talking about somebody who might be reading this and they're kind of fresh, right? And then
Yep.
we're talking about perhaps one of the hardest roles to encapsulate yourself in, just because a bad lurk can kind of seem like a baiter, especially when you're in pugs, stuff like that.
hmm
So I'm somebody who wants to be an aspiring lurker. How do I do that? Do I just load up pugs and it's trial by fire, or is it more back end stuff, studying and whatnot?
Um. Yeah. I mean, pugs is fine, but you're not gonna really learn rotations from pugs, because people don't play pugs they would matches. They're not reacting as a team. They're always reacting individually. So you're never really gonna be able to identify proper rotations through pugging. It's definitely something that requires a lot of pro studying. It's something that definitely requires a lot of time with your team, if you're at a lower level. If you're trying to become a lurk for a team, then it's something that the rest of your team needs to be on the same page as you for. You can't just be waiting for. You can't just sit on the other side of the map, and the other team is trying to do something and you're just completely ignoring it and then just looking for your 1v1. It's not going to be effective. It has to be something that's built into your team structure. The way you're looking for your openings, the way you're trying to give the rest of your team another fallback route. If whatever they're doing doesn't pan out, um, having the rest of your team on board makes it easier for you to get activated on your lurk, which is something I hear a lot of, like, broadcasters use the term activating. When
Right.
you're in those off to the side positions where you're just kind of on your own on the other side of the map. The way your team progresses the opposite side of the map definitely affects what the enemy team is doing, and can affect the way that you progress your role in the round. So having set protocols, or having your team know when you're going to be activating yourself, or even the IGL being the guy that is calling for you to activate yourself, it's good to be on the same page. and it's definitely something that requires a lot of work to get down and actually good.
Would you say becoming an effective lurker is hardest out of the 5?
I don't know about hardest.
Okay.
Um, maybe second hardest or third hardest, depending on how you view the how much work goes into being a good IGL. I would say being a really good opper is definitely harder than any of the other roles, in my opinion. Being an opper that can consistently carry games is definitely the hardest role to perfect. But in terms of individual skill, I'd say yeah, probably the lurk is the second hardest role to get down.
Okay. I noticed nowhere in the document you mentioned anything about ability to like win 1vx's being like the clutch
The
player.
clutch guy,
Is
yeah.
that do you just not believe in that as like an isolated expectation? Like having a Zipnix, do you not believe in that?
No, I don't think that that's something that's like a dedicated role in a team. I think somebody is just if they're good at that, then they're good at it, and it's gonna come up, and sometimes it's not. But for the most part, the focus should be on winning the round as a team, not individually. So clutching ability shouldn't really come into play when building a team. It should be how can we most effectively win rounds using our teamwork and the pieces that we have, not I'm gonna pick up this guy for my team because even though he's not good at any of these roles, he's gonna win us every 1v3 or 1v2 or whatever. Because how often do you even expect your team to be in 1v2s? Because if you expect your team to be in 1v2s or 1v3s a lot, then you probably need to work on other things first, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely. I wonder what the and you know, you probably if there was a way to figure like what percentage
Hmm.
of rounds you would even need, like we're talking about activating, how many percentage or what's the percentage of rounds you would even need to activate said clutch, you know?
Yeah,
You know,
and that person would even be in that clutch scenario. It's
right. And
it's
then you
it's
factor
probably
in
the
1 out of
percentage is
5.
so low, yeah, that it's not even worth trying to dedicate that role or getting a specific person for that specific role.
Absolutely. So out of the 5 being IGL, entry, support, op, and then lurk, which one do you think our region is hurting for the most?
Um, I'm not sure, honestly. I don't really follow a lot of low level CS, so I don't
Okay.
really know how teams are going down there. But when we need to make changes or when we have made changes in the past, I think the role we've struggled the hardest to fill is the entry role. And then aside from that, I think just like we were saying before, it's in-game leaders. There doesn't really seem to be a lot of up and coming in-game leaders. So probably those two roles, in-game leader and entries, probably equally as as scarce
Okay.
in the scene right now. Just like people willing to be that selfish, I'll die for the team, I'll die for the cause players. We don't really have many of that anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I wonder if that's like sometimes I wonder if that's like an instant gratification thing. You know, not trying to undermine anybody in the
Yeah.
scene or anything, but sometimes, you know, with how quick everything is anymore in our
Hmm.
society, um, you know, you wonder sometimes if that has something to do with it. So when I look at this year, you know, you guys, I'm transitioning away from this document, by the way.
Yeah, that's fine.
Awful segue, but nevertheless, so when I look at the foundation that you've built, obviously it's apparent you have the right mind in some capacity for the game.
Why, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as you know, the developmental cycle, what it takes to like grow this thing, you've
Hmm.
done it yourself. Obviously, you're now at Party Astronauts, currently unsigned for anybody that's looking. And so like we talk about that that instant gratification. You guys obviously sit on the opposite side of that. You're willing to put in the hours and everything else
Hmm.
necessary. So looking at this year, because now we're on the other side of we've had crowds back and you know things are looking really good for not only our region but CS as a whole. And for a lot of teams, this is
Yeah.
going to be a really big prove it year. So
Hmm.
what's your aspirations moving into this year? What do you hope to accomplish individually as a team anything? What are you hoping for?
As a team, obviously the main focus is always to just keep improving. That's just first and foremost what every team should be trying to aspire to.
I'm going to cut you off. Do you wake up every day? Like, obviously you want to improve, but does that sit in
Uh,
the back of your mind that you are chasing a check? Does that even,
Chasing a check?
yeah, like,
No, I haven't been salaried in my entire career,
okay.
so it's never been about the
That's
money.
incredibly noble, honestly. I just wanted to say
Um,
that. So
yeah,
continue.
no, I mean, money is definitely important. Don't get me wrong. Like that's definitely a goal is to get paid to play the game because obviously if the money wasn't there, people wouldn't aspire for it. Becoming professionals. That's sort of one of the reasons why people want to be pros. If the money wasn't in the competition, then the competition wouldn't be worth it. But yeah, no, for the most part, it's just about the love of the game and wanting to get better at it. When when we're talking long-term goals though, or maybe just for the year, I think the team and I pretty much all agree that we want to just consistently requalify for Pro League. We feel like now's a really good chance with a lot of the better players getting signed to partner teams and some other teams leaving and whatnot. So just continue to requalify. We were watching the major qualification process last year, and we saw how close that a lot of teams that we considered ourselves better than got, and so now qualifying for the major is definitely a big one for us. We saw Payne making it through. We saw Triumph almost make it through. EG was looking really bad, and they still made it. So we definitely consider ourselves to be up there in that level of possibly making the major. That's a goal. And then aside from that, it's just qualify for events, play events, get some eyes on us, be good, and then hopefully along with those accomplishments and the accomplishments that we've already gotten and achieved, comes an organization willing to back us with some support, and that'll give us even more room to grow and more resources to utilize to improve even quicker.
Awesome. Well, I always hold this reservation close to me, knowing that when you guys get signed, obviously it will be a glorious moment. But man,
Yeah.
I hope they don't take away the graphic. I just love your guys' logo so much.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I'm gonna be super sad about to see go is the party astronauts branding because
Yeah.
it was something that I've put a lot of hours into myself alone. Obviously, the team helped out, and we kind of split the cost for some things for stuff, but it was sort of like my own project, just kind of finding a way to help bring attention to our team. I figured that branding the team instead of the players individually could be something beneficial, and it's just even though we never really grew to like a massive level, like it was such a fun project to build, and it's gonna be sad to see the logo go.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But it's got to happen if we want to see everybody
Yeah, it'll be
prosper.
worth it. Yeah, for sure. If we manage to find an organization, then it'll be worth seeing it go.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel hopeful towards that, and I'm sure you guys too. So honestly, man, that's all I have. You've been very thorough in answering everything I've needed from you. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate
Yeah, of
the
course.
effort you've put into not only helping out the scene. Again, like you said, you've never done it for salary. I find that very noble.
Hmm.
We need more people
Thanks.
in the scene doing this. And then hopefully we can all make it to the promised land. So that's it for me and Joe over here. So thank you, for your time and everything.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell everyone where you can, find you on Twitter and everything else.
Yeah, so on Twitter you can find me at MunsterGG. You can also find our team's account PartyNut_GG on Twitter. Um, I'm always posting. I like to share ideas and banter with people in the scene and stuff on my Twitter. But you can always get updates on our team and events coming up and whatnot on our team's page. So yeah, give us a follow in both of those places.
Absolutely, follow them on those, and they also have a Discord where you can go in and you can ask them questions
Yeah,
and get it
yeah. I
going.
would love
So
to be more active in our Discord, but unfortunately, it's not really like a big thing. There's not many people in there. So if we get more people in there, yeah, it would be great to interact with the community a lot more.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Support the homies, and let's find them a home. So once again, guys, Muenster GG. That's where you can find him on Twitter. You can find me, Lucas at RBM. You can find the podcast, crouch_peak. All of that is on Twitter. Follow us all. Get in the know, get in the conversation. And that's pretty much it, guys. Once more, thanks to Joe for his time. Go support
Thank
Party
you.
Astronauts, support Rushby Media, support NACS, the whole 9 yards.
Yes,
So,
sir.
once again, guys, thanks so much, and we'll see you at the next one.
Press Control to crouch.
The Crouch Peak Podcast.